In the heart of the Arizona desert, silence once carried the echo of war and the promise of redemption. When T.J. Franklin, a veteran's son, lost to his own battles, discovers his late father's German shepherd Duke in a shelter, their reunion becomes more than fate. It's a second chance for them both. But Duke carries scars deeper than his wounds, and the ghosts of the battlefield still follow them into civilian life. As the two begin to heal, one act of courage will test everything they've rebuilt. Watch their story of loyalty, loss, and love that never surrenders, only on this channel. The desert was silent except for the wind whispering across the dunes. The night sky stretched endlessly heavy with dust and smoke. Sergeant Thomas Franklin adjusted his helmet and glanced at the German shepherd walking beside him. Duke moved with purpose, nose low to the ground, every muscle alert beneath his dark coat. The dog's breath rose in soft clouds that vanished into the cold air. They had been on patrol for hours. The radio crackled, then faded into static. Thomas raised a hand to signal a halt. His men crouched low, scanning the ridgeline. Duke stopped suddenly. His ears lifted, body tense. A low growl rumbled in his chest, deep and steady. Thomas had learned to trust that sound more than maps or reports. When Duke sensed danger, something was always out there. Thomas whispered, "Easy, boy." His voice was calm, but his pulse was racing. The night seemed to hold its breath. Then Duke pulled forward, eyes locked on the darkness ahead. The dog's tail stiffened. Thomas followed his gaze and saw it, a thin wire half buried in the sand. "Trap," he shouted. "Bravo team, fall back." The team moved fast, but Duke lunged toward the wire. Thomas reached out. "Duke, heel." The command hung in the air, lost to the explosion that followed. The blast tore through the stillness. Fire bloomed in the night like a sunrise made of dust and flame. Thomas was thrown backward. The sound vanished, replaced by a high, sharp ringing. His vision blurred. The desert spun around him. Pain burned up his leg. Through the haze, he saw Duke dragging himself toward him, limping, his right ear torn and bleeding. The dog's chest heaved, his eyes fixed on Thomas. The loyalty in that gaze was stronger than the smoke and chaos. Thomas tried to move, but his body refused. He reached out his hand, trembling, until it found Duke's paw. The dog pressed closer, trembling but steady. Thomas forced a weak smile. "You did good, boy," he whispered. "Your family." The words barely left his lips before his breathing slowed. Duke whimpered and pushed his head against Thomas's chest. The desert wind rose again, carrying the scent of burnt sand and cordite. In the distance, faint shouts echoed as soldiers rushed toward the blast site. Duke stayed beside his handler, guarding the man who had trusted him with his life. When the rescuers arrived, Duke was still there, silent, watchful, loyal to the end. As they lifted Thomas's body, Duke raised his head to the sky and let out a long, haunting howl. It rolled across the empty desert, echoing between the hills, a sound of grief and promise mingled together. That cry lingered long after the flames died, as if it carried a vow only Duke understood. Far away, the wind shifted east toward the world waiting beyond the battlefield, and somewhere in that distant future, another story was about to begin. The wind that once carried Duke's howl had long since crossed oceans and cities. It now drifted over the scorched streets of Tucson, where summer heat pressed down like a heavy hand. T.J. Franklin sat outside a small convenience store, his back against the wall, his jacket pulled close, even though the air shimmered with heat. 23 years old, he had the eyes of someone twice that age. Every sound, a car backfiring, a door slamming, made his shoulders tense. The war had never left him, even though he had never made it to the battlefield. He rubbed the scar on his wrist, a faint reminder of the hospital where the Army had written the words "medical discharge" on his file. The paper said post-traumatic stress anxiety, unfit for duty. What they never said was that he had been born carrying a war inside him, the legacy of a father who died in Afghanistan and a silence that followed him everywhere. Nights were the hardest. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams of explosions he had only seen through other people's eyes. In those dreams, he always heard a dog's cry echoing in the distance. He would wake with his heart pounding, whispering a name he had never spoken aloud. Duke. For 6 years, TJ had searched for the dog that served beside his father. It started as curiosity, then became an obsession. He spent hours in public libraries combing through military databases and adoption registries. Every record ended the same way: retired, transferred, unknown. That morning, the library's air conditioner buzzed weakly against the desert heat. TJ sat at one of the old computers, his fingers moving slowly over the keyboard. The screen flickered as he typed the only thing that mattered: K94427. The page loaded. His breath caught. Service dog K94427, German Shepherd, retired 2018 due to combat injuries. Previously adopted. Current status: surrendered to Pinal County Animal Shelter, July 2023. He blinked, reading it again to be sure. The words didn't change. Surrendered. July. That was only days ago. His pulse quickened. He pressed a trembling hand to his mouth. After years of dead ends of thinking Duke was gone, he was here, in Arizona, less than 60 miles away. TJ leaned back in the chair, staring at the faded ceiling tiles. He could almost hear his father's voice, steady and calm from the stories Grandma used to tell. Take care of what you love, son, even when it's hard. The computer fan hummed softly as he whispered, he's still alive. Outside, the heat blazed through the glass doors, but for the first time in years, TJ felt something break open inside him, something fierce and fragile. He printed the page with the last of his library credit, folded it carefully, and slipped it into the pocket of his worn army jacket. The fabric still smelled faintly of dust and memory. As he stepped out into the sunlight, the air shimmered around him, waves of heat rising from the asphalt. He adjusted his cap, looked toward the horizon, and began walking. The road ahead was long and his pockets were nearly empty. But for the first time, his steps had purpose. The journey to Pinal County had begun. The desert sun was merciless that afternoon. Heat shimmered above the cracked highway as TJ trudged along the roadside, his boots coated with dust. Every breath burned his throat, but he kept moving. There was no car, no bus fare left, only determination and a crumpled page in his pocket. The letters on it felt heavier than the sun itself, K94427. By the time he reached the small concrete building marked Pinal County Animal Shelter, his shirt was soaked through. The air outside was still the kind of silence that buzzes with trapped heat. He paused at the door, gathering what strength he had left, then stepped inside. The blast of air conditioning hit him sharp and cold, carrying the thick smell of disinfectant mixed with fear. The space echoed with the barking of dozens of dogs, some hopeful, some desperate. Metal cages lined both sides of the long corridor, each filled with a different rhythm of longing. A woman at the front desk looked up from her computer, her expression polite but tired. Help you, TJ cleared his throat. I'm looking for a dog, a German Shepherd. His voice wavered as he unfolded the paper. Service number K94427, name's Duke. At that, her posture changed. She took the paper, scanned it, and nodded slowly. Yeah, he came in last week. You military, was TJ said softly. Medical discharge. She studied him for a moment longer than most would. His thin frame, the jacket too big for his shoulders, the worn-out boots. It told its own story. Then she said quietly, he's in Kennel 12, but I should warn you, he's in rough shape. TJ followed her through the rows of cages. The barking grew louder, echoing off the concrete walls. The air smelled of bleach and sorrow. When they stopped, Kennel 12 was silent. Inside, a German Shepherd lay with his back turned to the world, his ribs pressed against thin skin, his coat dull with neglect. The right ear was torn, the mark from Afghanistan. Duke, TJ whispered. The dog didn't move. Only the slow rise and fall of his breathing showed he was still alive. The woman sighed. He hasn't eaten in 4 days. The vet says he's healthy enough, just lost. Happens with military dogs sometimes. They stop trying when they lose their handler. TJ knelt by the bars, heart hammering. Hey, buddy, it's okay. His voice broke. You remember him, don't you, Thomas Franklin? Still nothing. Duke's body remained still, facing the wall. TJ reached into his jacket and pulled out a dull metal tag, the one he had carried since childhood. His father's name was engraved across it, faded but unbroken. He pressed it gently against the bars. You know this boy. You carried it once. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Duke's ear twitched. His head lifted slightly. He sniffed the air once, twice. A tremor ran through his body. Slowly, he turned his head. Their eyes met. One pair clouded with grief, the other wide with disbelief. Recognition flickered like a match in the dark. Duke gave a low, hoarse breath that sounded halfway between a sigh and a whine. His tail moved once weak but certain. TJ pressed his forehead against the bars, tears mixing with dust. Hey there, soldier, he whispered. You made it. The woman at his side blinked away tears of her own. Looks like he remembers you. TJ nodded, voice trembling. He remembers Dad. Outside, the desert sun began to sink, painting the shelter walls in gold. Inside Kennel 12, a broken bond quietly began to mend. And as Duke pressed his nose against TJ's hand, the world outside that small cage seemed to fall away. The shelter office was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the scratching of a pen. The woman behind the desk smiled faintly as she slid a stack of papers toward TJ. You're eligible through the Veterans Assistance Program, she said. No adoption fee, and they'll cover his medical care for now. You just have to sign here. TJ's hand shook as he took the pen. The ink spread unevenly on the form, his name barely legible. He could feel Duke's eyes on him from across the room. The dog was standing now, alert but uncertain, the faint rhythm of his tail brushing the floor. When the paperwork was done, the woman clipped a simple leash to Duke's collar. He's yours, she said softly. Take care of each other. TJ crouched, holding out a hand. Duke stepped forward, hesitantly sniffing the air, then pressed his head against TJ's chest. For a moment, neither of them moved. The smell of dust, metal, and sun mixed with something new. Relief. Outside, the heat struck them like a wave. The sky blazed white, and the pavement shimmered beneath their feet. Duke squinted against the light, his steps slow and uneven. TJ bent down and whispered, It's okay, buddy. We're going home. They walked down the road together, both limping slightly, both scarred in ways that couldn't be seen. The shelter door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving silence in its wake. At the bus stop, TJ sat on the bench, Duke lying beside him. People passed by, giving the pair cautious glances. A few smiled. Most didn't. But TJ didn't care. He placed a hand on Duke's back, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing, the steady beat of life under his palm. When the bus arrived, the driver hesitated. Dogs aren't usually allowed, he said, but then he looked at Duke, thin, calm eyes heavy with age, and nodded them on. They sat at the back of the bus where the seats rattled and the air was thick with the smell of gasoline. Duke rested his head on TJ's leg, eyes half closed. The sound of the engine and the rhythm of the road became a lullaby. TJ stared out the window as the desert rolled past. Dry fields, rusted fences, the skeletons of forgotten towns. He thought of his father, of the stories Grandma used to tell about a man who never backed down. He looked down at Duke. I found you, boy, he whispered. I kept Dad's promise. Duke's tail thumped once against the floor, a small answer, but enough. When the bus stopped near the outskirts of town, the air outside felt thicker, filled with the smell of oil and heat. TJ stepped off, adjusting his backpack. The sun was sinking again, washing the street in gold. He turned toward the distant overpass that marked the edge of the city. Beneath it waited the camp. A cluster of tents, a few fires, a world that existed between shadows and survival. TJ touched Duke's collar gently. Let's go home, he said. Together they started down the road, two silhouettes walking through the fading light. The road ended beneath the heavy shadow of the overpass. The air was thick with smoke from small fires and the faint odor of rust and gasoline. A dozen tents were scattered along the concrete supports patched together from tarps, cardboard, and whatever scraps the city had forgotten. The hum of traffic above mixed with the low murmur of voices below, a rhythm of people surviving one day at a time. TJ led Duke through the maze of sleeping bags and crates. The German shepherd moved carefully, his gait uneven. His body still thin but steadier than before. Eyes followed them as they passed veterans in worn coats. Men lost to addiction, women clutching shopping carts filled with memories. Tommy Franklin's boy. A voice called from near a barrel fire. TJ turned. A man sat on an overturned bucket, his beard streaked white, his jacket covered with faded unit patches. His eyes were sharp despite the lines carved deep into his face. "Walter Hayes," the man said, rising slowly. "Your father saved me once, back in Helmand." TJ froze. He had heard the name before, one of the men his grandmother mentioned in old stories. "You knew him." "Knew him," Walter smiled, the expression soft and tired. "He pulled me out of a blast zone while everyone else ran for cover. I've owed him my life ever since." He looked down at Duke. "And I'll be damned. That's his dog, isn't it?" Duke stood close to TJ's leg, head tilted as if he recognized something familiar in Walter's voice. The old man crouched, slowly holding out a hand. Duke sniffed it, then leaned forward, pressing his muzzle into the man's palm. "Good boy," Walter murmured. "Still guarding the Franklins, huh?" They sat by the fire that night, the flames flickering orange against the concrete pillars. Walter passed TJ a tin plate of canned beans and a small piece of meat. "For him," he said, nodding toward Duke. TJ cooked the meat over the fire, the smell drawing a few curious glances from nearby tents. When it cooled, he placed it on the ground. Duke hesitated, then began to eat. Slowly at first, then faster. His tail brushed the dirt in soft, steady rhythm. Walter watched quietly. "You got your father's eyes," he said after a while. Same look when he was thinking about home. TJ stared into the flames. "I don't remember him. Just stories." "Stories keep the dead alive," Walter replied. "Your dad believed that too." They fell silent. Around them the camp settled for the night. Muted laughter, the crackle of wood, the sound of passing cars above like distant thunder. Duke lay beside TJ, full for the first time in days. His ears flicked at every sound alert, even as his eyes grew heavy. The firelight reflected in his gaze, steady and watchful. TJ reached out, resting a hand on Duke's side. The warmth beneath his palm felt like proof that some promises survived even the longest wars. In the glow of the barrel fire, among the forgotten and the broken, a small piece of peace began to form. Above them, the traffic roared on, indifferent, endless. But under the bridge, there was still life and loyalty and the quiet echo of brotherhood. By mid-July, the desert turned into a furnace. The overpass that had once given shade now trapped the heat, holding it like a cage. The air shimmered. The metal walls of the bridge radiated warmth that burned to the touch. Each breath felt thick, dry, and heavy. TJ woke before sunrise, sweat already clinging to his skin. Beside him, Duke panted, tongue lolling, ribs rising too fast. His fur was dull and hot to the touch. TJ poured the last of their water into a dented bowl. Duke licked it eagerly, then looked up at him with tired eyes. The temperature climbed with every hour. By noon, the camp was silent. People hid under blankets or inside tents, chasing shadows that offered little relief. The asphalt shimmered like liquid. The thermometer near the gas station up the road flashed 115 degrees. TJ counted the coins in his pocket, not enough for food, but maybe enough for water. He sold the small flashlight he had kept from his army days to a man down the road for 2 bottles and a half-eaten sandwich. One was for him, the other for Duke. When he returned, Duke was lying in the shade chest, rising unevenly. TJ knelt beside him, whispering, "Hang in there, buddy. We've been through worse." He tried to smile, but his voice shook. Duke's tail gave a faint thump against the dirt before going still. That night the heat didn't fade. The air under the bridge stayed heavy, unmoving. TJ drifted in and out of restless dreams until a strange sound snapped him awake. The dull thump of Duke's body hitting the ground. Duke. The dog was on his side legs, twitching violently, foam at the corners of his mouth. His breaths came in harsh, shallow bursts. TJ scrambled toward him, hands shaking. "No, no, stay with me!" He lifted Duke's head into his lap, feeling the tremors run through his body. The world around them disappeared. There was only the sound of his dog's struggle and his own heartbeat racing in his ears. "Somebody help TJ," shouted into the night. His voice echoed under the bridge but faded into the empty air. He pressed his forehead against Duke's fur, desperate. "Please, not you too." A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Walter appeared, moving slower than usual but steady. He took one look and knelt beside them. "Heat stroke," he said quickly. "We need to cool him down." Together, they poured what water they had left over Duke's body, soaking his fur. Walter tore his own shirt to use as a cloth, pressing it to the dog's head. After what felt like forever, the convulsions eased. Duke lay still, breathing shallow but steady. Walter exhaled. "He needs a vet tonight." "I know someone. There's a mobile clinic near the old railroad. They work with veterans. They'll take him for free." TJ nodded, unable to speak. His throat ached with relief and fear. An hour later, under the pale glow of streetlights, they loaded Duke into the back of a volunteer van. A woman in scrubs met them halfway, her hair tied back her face, calm but kind. "I'm Grace Morrison," she said. "I'll take care of him." TJ hesitated before letting go of the leash. Grace looked at him, steady and reassuring. "You did everything you could," she said gently. "Now let me help." TJ stepped back, watching as she guided Duke into the van. The dog's eyes flicked toward him, once tired but trusting. For the first time in days, TJ allowed himself to breathe. The van's tail lights glowed red in the night as it pulled away, disappearing down the empty road. The sound of its engine faded into silence, leaving only the hum of the desert wind and the promise of a new beginning. The clinic lights buzzed softly as Grace Morrison worked over the examination table. Her movements were calm and practiced, though her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. 30 years old, she had the posture of a soldier and the gentleness of someone who still believed in saving what others had given up on. Duke lay still beneath her hands, his fur damp from melted ice packs. His breathing was shallow but steady. Grace checked his pulse, then looked over at TJ, who stood in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. "You stayed up all night?" she asked. He nodded. "I didn't want him to wake up alone." Grace offered a small, tired smile. "You remind me of someone." She glanced back at Duke. "He's strong, dehydrated, overheated, but he's going to make it." Relief hit TJ like a wave. His shoulders sagged as he let out a shaky breath. "Thank you." Grace adjusted the IV line. "He's a military working dog, isn't he?" TJ blinked, surprised. "You can tell I worked with a rescue team in Kabul for 2 years," she said. "You don't forget the way they move. Loyal to a fault?" Her hand brushed Duke's fur. "They always carry the war with them." Her tone softened. "You do too, don't you?" TJ didn't answer. His gaze stayed on the dog, but Grace could see the tremor in his jaw, the quiet exhaustion in his eyes. After a long pause, she said, "He'll need a few days of rest, maybe more. The shelter clinic isn't equipped for that. You don't look like you've got a place to stay either." TJ's lips pressed together. "I'll figure it out." Grace studied him for a moment, then wiped her hands on a towel. "I have a small garage at home. It's not much, but it's cool and safe. He can recover there." TJ frowned. "You don't even know me." "I know what exhaustion looks like," she replied quietly, "and I know that dog won't heal without you close by." He hesitated, torn between gratitude and shame. "I don't want to cause trouble." "You won't," Grace said simply. "You can't heal in the dark, TJ. Neither of you can." The words hung between them, gentle but firm. TJ felt something inside him shift, an ache that wasn't pain but release. By sunset, Duke was strong enough to stand. Grace guided them to her old pickup truck, the back lined with blankets. TJ climbed in beside Duke, keeping one hand on his shoulder. Grace started the engine, the headlights cutting through the desert dusk. They drove through the sleeping streets of Tucson, past quiet houses and flickering porch lights. For the first time in weeks, TJ felt the faint hum of safety, a sense of movement towards something better. When they stopped in front of a small house with a faded blue door, Grace turned off the engine. The garage door creaked as she lifted it, revealing a narrow space with a fan, an old bed, and a folded blanket. "It's not fancy," she said, smiling faintly, "but it's peace." TJ looked inside, his throat tight. "It's perfect." Grace nodded. "Welcome home, both of you." As Duke stepped into the cool space, his tail brushed TJ's leg, slow, steady, alive. The garage smelled faintly of oil and soap, but to them it was heaven. Outside, the desert night settled in, quiet, wide, and full of promise. The garage was small, lined with old tools and the faint scent of motor oil. A single fan hummed from the corner, pushing warm air in slow circles. Against the back wall stood a narrow bed with clean sheets and a folded blanket. On the table beside it sat a bowl of water, a few cans of food, and a handwritten note in Grace's careful script for Duke and his handler. TJ stood at the doorway for a long moment, taking it in. After months of sleeping on concrete, this place felt unreal. It wasn't luxury, it was difty, and that to him was heaven. He led Duke to the bed. The dog circled twice, sniffing the blanket, then lowered himself carefully, groaning as his body sank into the soft surface. His breathing slowed. TJ sat beside him, his hand resting on Duke's back. "You can rest now," he whispered. "We made it." Duke's eyes fluttered closed. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. For the first time since Afghanistan, he slept without flinching, without twitching at every sound. TJ leaned back against the wall, exhaustion flooding through him. The hum of the fan and the soft night breeze became a lullaby. When morning came, the sunlight crept through the narrow window, painting lines of gold across the floor. The light touched Duke's fur, bringing out the soft tan beneath the darker coat. The dog stretched, yawned, and thumped his tail once against the bed frame. TJ smiled, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, soldier." A gentle knock sounded on the door. Grace peeked in, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You both survived the night," she said with a smile. TJ stood quickly, embarrassed. "I can help around the house. Fix things. Anything you need." Grace handed him a mug. "We'll talk about that later. Just eat first." She placed a bowl of food on the floor for Duke. "He deserves a proper meal." Footsteps sounded behind her. A tall man with dark hair and tired eyes appeared at the doorway. "Dan Morrison," he said, offering a hand, Grace's husband. His grip was firm, but his tone careful, measured, assessing. TJ nodded. "Thank you for letting us stay." Dan's expression softened slightly. "Anyone who cares that much about a dog deserves a roof for a while." Before TJ could answer, a small voice piped up from behind Dan. "Mom." A young girl stood in the doorway, clutching a stuffed rabbit. She was 8, maybe 9, her hair messy from sleep. Her eyes found Duke, and she froze. Lily Grace said gently, "This is TJ, and that's Duke." Lily didn't move. Her gaze stayed fixed on the German Shepherd. "He's big," she said quietly. TJ crouched beside Duke. "He's gentle. You can say hi if you want." But Lily shook her head, taking a step back. "Dogs bite." Grace's voice softened. She had a bad experience a year ago. A neighbor's dog scared her. Duke seemed to sense the tension. He stayed perfectly still, his ears lowered, eyes calm. The only movement came from the slow wag of his tail brushing against the floor. Lily peeked at him again, uncertain. Her eyes flicked between her mother and the dog, then back to TJ. "He doesn't look mean," she murmured almost to herself. TJ smiled. "He's just tired. Like me." Grace placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's give them space." As the door closed, Duke lifted his head, watching the family disappear into the kitchen. TJ exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Outside, a soft wind carried the sound of morning traffic. Inside, Duke drifted back to sleep, his paws twitching slightly as if dreaming. TJ looked around the garage again, the fan, the sunlight, the quiet. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he belonged somewhere. He didn't know it yet, but this small space would become the first step in both their healing. Within a week, Duke began to regain strength. His fur had a faint sheen again, and his eyes carried a flicker of life. Each morning, TJ sat by the garage door, feeding him small portions and talking quietly while the desert wind moved through the cracks in the walls. Duke listened, head tilted, tail brushing softly against the floor, his bond with TJ growing stronger every day. Yet one thing never changed. He would not cross the threshold. The first time TJ opened the door, sunlight spilled across the floor, slicing through the cool dimness. Duke froze where he stood, his body stiffened, eyes wide, breath quickening. The outside world stretched before him, bright and boundless, but his paws refused to move. He trembled, then backed away, tail tucked close. TJ crouched beside him. "It's okay, boy," he whispered. "No danger out there." He placed a hand on Duke's back, feeling the muscles tighten beneath his fur, but the dog only pressed closer to the wall, refusing to take another step. Grace appeared at the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. Her expression softened as she watched the scene unfold. "He's not ready," she said quietly. "PTSD, just like yours, TJ." TJ looked up at her, startled by the truth in her tone. "I thought only people—" Grace shook her head. "Trauma doesn't care what species you are. It leaves its mark the same way. Fear, hesitation, silence. It's survival trying to protect what's left." TJ nodded slowly. He looked back at Duke, seeing more than a wounded animal. He saw himself. The sleepless nights, the flashbacks, the panic that came out of nowhere. They were mirrors of the same pain. That afternoon, while Grace went inside to cook, Lily lingered by the half-open garage door. She stood at a distance, clutching her stuffed rabbit, watching Duke lying in the shade. After a moment, she asked softly, "Is he brave if he's scared?" TJ glanced at her, unsure how to answer. Then he looked at Duke, at the way his chest rose and fell, steady but cautious, and the answer came naturally. "Being brave," TJ said gently, "means being scared and doing it anyway." Lily tilted her head, thinking it over. "So he's brave every day." "Every single day," TJ said. "So am I. And so are you." She smiled shyly, the kind of smile that didn't last long but meant everything. She stepped a little closer to Duke. The dog's ears lifted. He didn't move away this time, just watched her calm and quiet. "Hi, Duke," Lily whispered. "You're brave." The dog blinked, then laid his head back down, tail thumping softly. When Grace returned, she paused at the doorway, seeing the girl standing near the dog and TJ sitting nearby, both quiet under the golden light. Her eyes softened. Healing, she thought, always began with small steps. Later, when night settled over the house, TJ lay awake on the narrow bed, Duke's breathing steady beside him. The desert outside was silent, but in that stillness, something new had taken root. Trust. TJ whispered into the dark, "We'll get there, boy, one step at a time." Duke's ear flicked as if he understood. Neither of them noticed the porch light turning on outside or the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Grace's mother had come to visit, and with her a past that would change everything. The next morning began with the sound of a car door closing outside. Grace looked up from the kitchen sink and sighed softly. "Mom's here," she murmured. TJ was sitting in the garage polishing Duke's collar with an old rag. He heard the footsteps before he saw her. A slow, careful rhythm of someone who moved through the world with quiet authority. Evelyn Morrison stepped into view. 68 years old, tall and graceful despite the stiffness in her movements, she carried herself like someone who had spent a lifetime standing in chaos and learning how to stay calm. Her silver hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her sharp eyes took in everything: the dog, the man, the worn army jacket hanging on a nail by the bed. Mom Grace greeted her gently, drying her hands. "This is TJ Franklin, the one I told you about." Evelyn's gaze settled on TJ, then shifted to Duke. The moment her eyes landed on the dog, she froze, her breath caught in her throat. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop moving. "That dog," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "German Shepherd. Scars on the right ear." She took a step closer as if pulled by something invisible. "It can't be." TJ stood quickly. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Evelyn didn't answer. Her hand reached toward Duke, trembling slightly. "My husband," she said at last, her tone distant, as if speaking to ghosts. "He was a handler in Vietnam. His dog's name was Sergeant. They died together." Her fingers brushed Duke's fur and she blinked back sudden tears. "It's been almost 50 years, but seeing him now, it's like looking at them again." Grace placed a gentle hand on her mother's shoulder. "Mom, this is Duke. He's a retired service dog. TJ adopted him after his rescue." Evelyn turned to TJ, eyes still glistening. "You're a soldier." TJ hesitated. "I tried to be," he said quietly. "Didn't make it far. My dad was, though. Thomas Franklin." The name struck Evelyn like a spark. She stared at him, stunned. "Thomas Franklin. Sergeant Franklin, Afghanistan. 2017. TJ nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. He was my father." For a long moment, Evelyn said nothing. She lowered herself into a chair, covering her mouth with one hand as if trying to contain everything rushing through her. "My son," she whispered. "Daniel Morrison. He served in the same unit. He wrote to me about a handler named Franklin and his dog, said they saved his life more than once." TJ's eyes widened. "Daniel Morrison." Grace's hand went still on the chair. "Mom, you never told me that." Evelyn's voice broke. "He didn't come home either." Her gaze returned to Duke, then to TJ. "My son died in the same mission your father did." The air felt heavy with memory. Duke lifted his head and moved closer, pressing against TJ's leg. Evelyn wiped at her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Daniel said that dog, Duke, had instincts beyond training. He said Franklin treated him like family. He even mentioned a baby boy back home. You." TJ swallowed hard, emotion tightening his chest. "He wrote about us." "Yes," Evelyn said. "He said your father talked about you every day. Said he couldn't wait to get home and teach you how to throw a ball." TJ couldn't speak. His eyes burned, his throat locked. Evelyn reached across the small table and took his hand. "For years, I carried guilt that my son's letters ended before I could tell his story. But maybe maybe you and Duke coming here, it's not random." Grace stood silently, tears in her eyes, watching her mother and TJ sit across from each other, like two pages of the same story finally meeting. Duke laid his head on TJ's knee, his tail sweeping the floor. Evelyn took a deep breath, her voice steady again. "I kept Daniel's letters, all of them. There are things in them you should see." TJ looked up, hope flickering through the grief. Evelyn nodded. "He wrote about your father and about Duke. The last one, it carried a promise." She rose slowly, her joints stiff but her steps sure. "Wait here," she said. "I'll bring them." As she disappeared down the hall, Grace looked at TJ. "Are you okay?" TJ wiped at his eyes and smiled faintly. "I think I'm about to understand the part of my father I never knew." In the quiet that followed, Duke let out a soft, low sigh as if he already knew what the letters would reveal. Evelyn returned holding a small wooden box worn smooth from time and touch. She set it gently on the table between them. Its hinges creaked as she opened it, revealing a neat stack of faded envelopes bound with a frayed ribbon. Each one was carefully labeled in Daniel Morrison's precise handwriting, dates, locations, and dust from another lifetime. "These are all I have left of him," Evelyn said softly. Her eyes glimmered in the afternoon light filtering through the curtains, but they kept him alive for me. She untied the ribbon and handed 3 envelopes to TJ. "These are the ones that mention your father." TJ's hands trembled as he unfolded the first letter. The paper was thin and yellowed, the ink faint but still readable. He cleared his throat and began to read aloud. "March 20. Mom, We've got a new guy in our unit, Sergeant Thomas Franklin. He's sharp, calm under pressure, and treats that dog of his like a brother. Duke's his name. Smartest animal I've ever seen. Saved us from an ambush yesterday. Tommy jokes that Duke's got a sixth sense for trouble. I believe him. Every time I look at those two, I'm reminded that loyalty is still real out here. TJ's voice wavered. He blinked hard and opened the second letter. April 2017. We were on patrol again, long day under the Afghan sun. Duke picked up something, wouldn't move forward. Tommy trusted him, instantly told us to hold position. 5 minutes later, a roadside bomb went off right where we would have been walking. Duke saved 8 men today. Tommy just laughed and said he earned his dinner. He gave the dog his entire ration of steak. That's the kind of man he is, Mom. The kind you follow without question. TJ's grip tightened on the page. He could almost see it. The laughter, the heat, the dust, his father's hand patting Duke's side. He could hear it too, the voice he'd never really known. He unfolded the third letter with care as if it might crumble in his hands. May 2010. There's a mission coming up, high risk. Franklin and Duke are on point, and I'll be covering them from Overwatch. He pulled me aside tonight, said if anything happens to him, I need to promise something. Bring Duke home. He belongs with my boy, he told me. Make sure he knows his father was proud. I promise, Mom. I swear, I'll keep that promise no matter what happens. TJ stopped reading. The room was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock and the slow hum of the ceiling fan. His vision blurred as he stared at the last line, the ink smudged by what might have been Daniel's sweat or tears. He set the letter down and pressed his palms over his face. He thought about me until the end, he whispered. They both did. Evelyn reached across the table, her hand warm against his. They died in the same battle, TJ. Different sides of the hill, same fight. Maybe they never got to finish their promise, but somehow it found its way here. On the floor, Duke shifted as if sensing the weight in the air. He rose, padded over, and rested his head on TJ's knee. His tongue brushed lightly across TJ's hand, a small grounding gesture. TJ smiled through the tears. He remembers. Evelyn watched them quietly, her own eyes wet but peaceful. Maybe this isn't coincidence, she said finally. Maybe it's purpose. The afternoon light deepened into gold, filling the room with warmth. For the first time, the ghosts of war didn't feel so heavy. They felt like guides. Outside, the rumble of an approaching truck broke the stillness. Grace looked out the window and frowned. That's Rick Walsh, she said, our neighbor. Evelyn sighed. He doesn't visit often. TJ glanced at her. Who is he? Grace hesitated. A man who's lost a lot, and he's about to make things harder for us. The next morning was quiet until the sound of footsteps echoed along the driveway. Grace stepped out of the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel as a shadow crossed the window. Rick Walsh stood by the fence, tall, rigid, his arms folded across his chest. The Arizona sun burned against his weathered face, deepening the hard lines around his eyes. He was in his early 40s, but there was an oldness about him, something brittle as if time had pressed down too hard. Grace walked out to meet him. Morning, Rick. Morning, he said curtly. His gaze drifted toward the garage where Duke lay in the doorway, calm but alert. The dog's ears lifted and his eyes locked on Rick. The man's jaw tightened. So Rick muttered, you decided to bring one of those in. Grace frowned. One of what? Those dogs, he said, voice flat. The military kind. Dangerous by training. You shouldn't keep it in a family neighborhood. Before Grace could answer, TJ stepped outside. He had been fixing the fan in the garage and wiped his hands on a rag. He's not dangerous, TJ said quietly. He's retired. He served overseas. Rick's eyes narrowed. Served. They're trained to attack. Ask my son. Grace's tone softened. Connor is doing better, isn't he? Rick's gaze turned cold. He still can't go near a dog without shaking. He looked at Duke again, anger mixing with something else, fear. I won't let another one hurt him. TJ stood his ground. Duke saved lives. He's not a threat. Rick didn't respond. He turned sharply and walked back toward his house, muttering something under his breath. Grace watched him go, a tightness settling in her chest. Later that afternoon, she found the letter taped to the mailbox. The seal of the Homeowners Association glared in red at the top. Notice of violation, dangerous dog complaint. Her stomach sank as she read. Multiple residents have expressed concern regarding a German Shepherd residing at the Morrison property. The animal may present a safety risk. Immediate review required. Grace carried the letter inside her hand, trembling. He filed a complaint, she told TJ. TJ took the paper, scanning the lines. His voice was steady, but the frustration showed in his eyes. He doesn't even know Duke. He knows fear, Grace said softly. And fear makes people cruel. Evelyn looked up from the living room, her voice calm but firm. He's protecting his son the only way he knows how. People who lose something often build walls around the wound. Grace exhaled slowly. Walls that end up hurting others. By evening, the mood in the house had shifted. Dan came home, his expression tight after hearing the news. Lily, sensing the tension, stayed close to Grace. TJ sat on the floor beside Duke, running his hand through the dog's fur. They're calling you dangerous, buddy, he murmured. Duke tilted his head, eyes soft, uncomprehending. We'll fight this, Grace said, her voice firm, HOA or not. There are laws protecting service animals. I'll find someone to help. Someone like who? Dan asked. Grace thought for a moment. There's a behavioral specialist I used to work with. She evaluates trauma dogs. If Duke passes her assessment, they can't touch us. TJ nodded. When can she come? Tomorrow morning, Grace replied. Early. TJ looked down at Duke. You hear that, boy? We'll prove them wrong. Duke rested his head on TJ's knee, letting out a quiet breath. The dog's eyes flicked toward the open door, then back to the floor where sunlight cut a narrow path across the concrete. He didn't know yet that by stepping into that light, he would have to face his greatest fear. The next morning arrived heavy with silence. The air was still cool, but tension hummed through the house. Grace brewed coffee without a word while TJ sat on the floor beside Duke, his fingers brushing the dog's fur in slow, steady strokes. Duke sensed the unease and stayed close, his amber eyes shifting between TJ and the door. When the knock finally came, it startled them both. Grace opened the door to a small woman with sharp eyes and gray-streaked hair pulled neatly into a braid. She carried a clipboard and a calm authority. Dr. Sarah Chen, she said, offering her hand. Behavioral specialist. You must be Duke. The dog stayed by TJ's leg muscles tight, watching the stranger carefully. Grace led them into the living room, sunlight pouring through the window. Thank you for coming on short notice. Dr. Chen nodded. I understand this is about a neighborhood complaint. I'll need to observe Duke in several settings, inside, outside, and around people. My goal is to see if he poses any behavioral risk. TJ swallowed hard. He doesn't. He's just been through a lot. Dr. Chen's eyes softened. So have many soldiers I've worked with. Trauma doesn't make someone dangerous. She set her bag down and crouched a few feet from Duke, speaking in a low, measured voice. Hey there, boy. You're safe. Duke's ears twitched. He didn't growl, but his body stayed rigid. For the next half hour, Dr. Chen tested small things. His response to touch, to sudden movement, to her voice. Duke stayed calm, cautious, but respectful, never once showing aggression. Then came the hardest part. I need to see how he reacts outside, she said gently. That's where most dogs with trauma show distress. TJ felt Duke tense the moment the door opened. The warm Arizona sunlight spilled across the floor and the smell of the open air filled the garage. Duke froze, his tail lowered, paws glued to the ground. His breath came fast. It's okay, TJ whispered, crouching beside him. We go together. We come back together. Duke's body trembled, torn between fear and trust. TJ stepped out first, one foot into the sunlight, then turned and held out a hand. Come on, buddy. You're not alone anymore. For a long moment, nothing moved but the air. Then Duke took a shaky breath, lifted one paw and placed it over the threshold. Another step followed, then another. When his paws hit the grass, he stopped again, shaking but standing. TJ's throat tightened as he knelt down and wrapped an arm around him. That's it. You did it, Duke. Dr. Chen scribbled something on her clipboard, her lips curving into a faint smile. Remarkable trust response, she murmured. He's not aggressive. He's loyal and deeply bonded to his handler. Grace exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Even Dan, watching from the porch, smiled for the first time that morning. Dr. Chen walked a slow circle around them, testing Duke's reaction to distant noise, to passing cars, to the wind rustling the trees. Each time Duke flinched but stayed near TJ, never pulling away. When the assessment ended, Dr. Chen closed her notebook. I'll file my report today. Duke shows signs of trauma-related anxiety but no aggression. In my professional opinion, he's safe. TJ looked down at Duke, his voice low. Hear that, boy? They know now. You're not what they said you were. Duke pressed his nose into TJ's hand, letting out a long, soft breath, the kind that carried more meaning than words ever could. Grace smiled. Thank you, Dr. Chen. The specialist nodded. Take care of him. He's rare. When she left, the morning light felt different. Softer, kinder. TJ sat with Duke on the porch, the dog's head resting on his lap. For a fleeting moment, peace returned. But across the street, Rick Walsh stood by his window watching them. His face was unreadable. Inside his house, the lights flickered once, and a faint crackle came from an old outlet near the stairs. That night, flames would follow. The night began quiet. The desert sky stretched endless and black, the air thick with the scent of dust and summer heat. Under the soft hum of the streetlights, the neighborhood slept. TJ lay awake in the garage, listening to Duke's steady breathing. The dog twitched occasionally, chasing something in his dreams. Outside, a single cricket chirped near the fence. Everything felt still. Too still. Then came the sound. A faint pop, followed by another sharper one. Duke's ears shot up. He lifted his head, nostrils flaring. A moment later, the wind carried it, the acrid scent of smoke. Duke, TJ whispered. The dog was already on his feet, growling, low eyes fixed on the house across the street. The next sound tore through the calm. A scream. TJ bolted upright. Flames flickered in the second-floor window of Rick Walsh's house, small at first, then growing fast. Fire Grace shouted from inside. She grabbed her phone, dialing for help while TJ ran barefoot into the street. Rick stumbled out the front door, coughing, his face gray with panic. Connor, he shouted. He's still upstairs. The window above them glowed orange smoke pouring through the cracks. Before TJ could react, Duke broke free from his side and sprinted toward the house. Duke, no. TJ yelled, but the dog didn't stop. He crashed through the half-open door, swallowed by fire and shadow. TJ ran after him, the heat slamming into his face. Inside, the air was thick and choking, filled with the roar of flames and the snapping of burning wood. He could barely see past the smoke. Duke, he shouted, his voice raw. Come back. Somewhere above, a small cry echoed through the chaos. A child's voice, weak, terrified. Connor. Through the haze, TJ caught sight of Duke at the foot of the stairs. The dog hesitated for half a second, trembling eyes wide at the wall of fire blocking the way. Fear gripped him. Old memories rising, the explosions, the smoke, the screams from another war. Then, as if hearing TJ's voice again, Duke took a deep breath and charged upward. The staircase groaned beneath his weight. Flames licked at his paws, sparks flying around him. He disappeared into the smoke. TJ followed as far as he could, coughing, covering his mouth with his arm. He could hear Rick outside shouting, Connor, please, someone help him. Then came a sound that cut through everything, a sharp bark, strong and defiant. Duke burst through the doorway upstairs, his fur-singed eyes blazing. He clamped his teeth into Connor's shirt, pulling the boy toward him. The child clung to his neck, sobbing. Step by step, Duke dragged him back through the smoke, refusing to let go. TJ caught sight of them near the stairs. "Come on, boy, this way," he yelled. Duke leapt the final step, Connor still in his grasp. Together they stumbled through the collapsing hallway as beams cracked overhead. The front door loomed ahead, a rectangle of cool night beyond the fire. TJ reached forward, grabbed Connor's arm, and pulled him through. Duke followed, collapsing onto the grass the moment they were clear. His sides heaved, his fur dark with soot, but his tail gave one slow, steady wag. Rick dropped to his knees beside his son, wrapping him in his arms. "Connor. Oh, God." He looked up at Duke, tears cutting streaks through the ash on his face. "He saved him. The dog saved my son." TJ knelt beside Duke, pressing a hand to his chest. The dog's eyes met his, tired but calm, the reflection of the flames still dancing in their depths. Sirens wailed in the distance. Neighbors gathered in shock, watching as smoke rose into the night sky. Grace rushed across the street with a blanket, wrapping it around Connor, then placing another over Duke. "You're a hero," she whispered to the dog. "You're safe now." As the fire engines arrived, Rick stood silently, holding his boy, eyes fixed on the animal he once feared. His face trembled under the weight of gratitude and shame. Duke lay quietly, his head resting against TJ's arm, chest rising in slow, deliberate breaths. Around them, the red lights flickered like echoes of war. But this time, the battle had ended in life, not loss. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beep of monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen. Morning light filtered through the blinds, painting thin lines across the white sheets. Connor lay propped against a pillow, his face pale but peaceful. The burns were minor, the doctors had said. He would heal. On the floor beside the bed, Duke rested with his head on his paws. His fur was singed at the edges, bandaged in a few places, but his breathing was strong. The boy's small hand reached down and brushed gently against the dog's head. "He's warm," Connor whispered, smiling faintly. "He's not scary. He's brave." TJ sat nearby, exhaustion written across his face. He watched the boy and the dog in silence, a strange calm settling over him. Every rise and fall of Duke's chest felt like a small miracle. The door opened quietly. Rick stood there, a bandage on his arm, his clothes still smelling faintly of smoke. For a long moment, he didn't move. His eyes found Connor first, then Duke, then TJ. TJ stood. The two men faced each other in the stillness. Rick swallowed hard. "I don't know where to start," he said finally. "You saved my son. Or maybe he did." His gaze dropped to Duke. "And I'm the one who tried to take him from you." TJ shook his head. "He just did what he was trained to do. Protect people." Rick's voice cracked. "I called him dangerous. I made him the enemy because I was too afraid to face my own fear." "I'm sorry, TJ." TJ's eyes softened. "You were scared for your kid. I get it." He paused, then added quietly, "Maybe we both needed something to remind us that not everything broken stays that way." Rick nodded, his shoulders trembling. He stepped closer, crouching beside Duke. The dog opened his eyes, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. The man who had once feared him and the animal who had saved his world. Rick reached out a hand. Duke sniffed it, then pressed his nose against Rick's palm. It was a gesture without words, and it broke whatever was left of the distance between them. Later that afternoon, the story spread through the neighborhood. Word of the fire and the rescue reached every doorstep. Photos appeared online. A soot-covered German shepherd lying beside a child's hospital bed. Within a day, the mailbox at Grace's house overflowed with letters. Notes from neighbors, strangers, even veterans groups. Someone started a petition titled "Honor Duke, the Hero Dog." Grace read one aloud at the kitchen table. "He's not just a dog. He's proof that courage still lives among us." HOA officials came 2 days later. The same man who had once delivered warnings now handed over an envelope. "We're retracting the complaint," he said. "No fines, no violations." And the board voted to recognize Duke for his service. Grace smiled through tears. TJ crouched beside Duke, scratching behind his ear. Hear that, hero? You've got a clean record now. Duke's tail thumped lazily against the floor. He looked up at TJ, his eyes steady, calm, proud. Outside the neighborhood, kids had tied a banner across the fence, "Welcome home." Duke the hero dog. Rick stood among them, one hand on Connor's shoulder, the other resting on the fence. When TJ stepped outside, their eyes met. "Thank you," Rick said quietly, "for everything." TJ nodded. "We're all just trying to make things right." Rick looked down at his son, who was still holding a get well card for Duke. "He's teaching us how." The evening light glowed soft and golden over the street. For the first time, the air between the two houses felt easy, like something heavy had finally been lifted. But not all wounds fade with applause. That night, long after the lights dimmed and the celebration quieted, Rick sat alone on his porch, staring at the burned shell of his house. The truth pressed against him like a weight he could no longer carry. Tomorrow he would have to tell them what really happened, the lie that had haunted his family for years. The morning after the fire, the neighborhood was still. The smell of smoke lingered faintly in the air, mixing with the sweetness of blooming mesquite trees. Rick sat on his porch, his hands clasped, staring at the blackened remains of his living room. Connor was inside with Grace and TJ playing quietly with Duke. For hours, Rick had said nothing. Now, as the sun climbed higher, he stood, straightened his back, and crossed the street. His steps were slow, heavy with something more than exhaustion. Grace opened the door before he could knock. "Rick," she greeted softly. "Come in." Evelyn was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, Duke lying peacefully at her feet. She glanced up as Rick entered. His eyes darted toward the dog, then back to her. "I need to tell you something," Rick said. His voice was hoarse but steady. "It's about what happened 3 years ago." Grace nodded. "Go ahead." Rick took a breath, as if pulling the words from somewhere buried deep. "Connor's accident. The one I blamed on a dog." He paused, his jaw tightening. "It wasn't the dog's fault. It was mine." Silence filled the room, heavy and still. TJ leaned against the counter, arms folded, waiting. Rick continued, his voice breaking. "There was an argument that night. My wife, Jennifer, and I were fighting. I shouted, shoved her. The dog tried to protect her. It jumped between us. I panicked and hid it away. Connor ran in crying, trying to stop it all. He tripped. There was a fence post on the ground. He swallowed hard. He fell against it. Grace's eyes softened, but she didn't speak. Rick pressed on. He was bleeding, terrified. I told everyone the dog attacked him. I told myself that story until I almost believed it. They put the dog down because of my lie. Jennifer left soon after. And his voice cracked. I destroyed everything trying to bury what I'd done." Duke lifted his head at the sound of Rick's voice, watching quietly, tail still. Evelyn rose slowly from her chair, her hands steady despite her age. She walked over and placed a gentle hand on Rick's arm. "Guilt is a kind of battlefield," she said softly, "and you've been fighting alone for too long." Tears blurred Rick's vision. "I don't expect forgiveness." Evelyn's eyes were kind, filled with something deeper than pity. "Forgiveness isn't a reward, Rick. It's release. We're all soldiers of our own wars. The brave ones are those who stop fighting and start healing." Grace stepped forward. "You made a terrible mistake, but telling the truth, that's the first right thing you've done in a long time." TJ looked at Rick for a moment, then nodded. "You faced it. That matters." Rick let out a trembling breath, the kind that sounded like surrender. "Thank you," he whispered. Duke stood across the room and rested his head gently against Rick's leg. The man froze, then lowered a hand to the dog's neck. Duke's fur was soft and warm under his palm, a silent acknowledgement that forgiveness didn't always need words. For a while no one spoke. The room felt lighter, as if a door had finally opened. Outside, the sun broke fully through the clouds, spilling golden light across the kitchen. Evelyn returned to her seat, smiling faintly. Now she said, "Let's make sure everyone gets a second chance, including you." Rick nodded, wiping his face. I'll start by rebuilding. Maybe this time I'll do it right. Grace exchanged a glance with TJ. Speaking of rebuilding, she said, there's something we need to discuss about you too. TJ frowned slightly. Me? She smiled. It's time you stopped living in garages and started living again. The light in the room softened. Duke settled beside TJ, eyes closing in quiet peace. Something in the air had shifted. The kind of calm that comes only after truth has burned everything false away. A week later, the desert air felt softer, as if the storms that had swept through every life on that street had finally begun to calm. The smell of ash had faded, replaced by the faint sweetness of blooming cactus and the sound of hammers echoing from Rick's house as rebuilding began. Grace stood on the porch, phone in hand, speaking quietly. Yes, he's a veteran. Yes, he has a service animal. I can send the paperwork today. She smiled, her tone brightening. Thank you, that's wonderful news. When she hung up, she turned to TJ, who was sitting on the steps with Duke lying at his feet. You're officially approved, she said. The Veterans Housing Program has a transitional apartment ready for you and Duke. It's not far, quiet area near the park. TJ blinked as if unsure whether to believe her. You're serious, completely, Grace replied. Move-in is next week. They're even covering utilities until you're back on your feet. TJ looked down at Duke, who tilted his head, sensing something good. You hear that, partner? We've got a place? Grace stepped closer, her expression warm. You'll still come by, though. Duke has appointments with the therapy program every Thursday, and Lily might protest if you disappear. At the mention of her name, Lily's voice called from the yard. TJ, come see. He stood and followed the sound of laughter. In the backyard, Lily and Connor were sitting on the grass, throwing a ball gently back and forth, while Duke lay between them, tail sweeping the ground in lazy arcs. Connor reached out, scratching behind Duke's ear. He likes this spot, the boy said, grinning. Lily nodded, her ponytail bouncing. He likes you. Mom says he helps people who are scared. Connor looked thoughtful. Then maybe he helps me too. TJ watched from a few feet away, the sight tightening something in his chest in the best way possible. The two children, one who had once feared every bark and one who had carried scars from a fire, were laughing together, their walls gone. Duke's eyes half closed in the sunlight, his breathing steady. Rick was fixing a section of the fence nearby. When he caught TJ's gaze, he raised a hand. TJ returned the gesture. No words were needed. Grace came to stand beside TJ. You see that? She said softly. That's what healing looks like, he nodded. They're not afraid anymore. Neither are you, she replied. For the first time, TJ didn't argue. He just smiled. The breeze carried the smell of cut grass and the faint sound of children's laughter. Duke lifted his head to watch Lily and Connor run a ball clutched in their hands, their joy unrestrained. Love breaks the chain, Grace said quietly. Every time. TJ glanced at her. The chain of what fear, she said. Pain, all of it. You passed it back as love instead. He let her words sink in. For once, the weight on his shoulders felt light. As the sun began to sink behind the hills, Duke lay with his head on Connor's lap while Lily braided wildflowers into his collar. The two children giggled, the sound filling the yard like music. TJ watched them, hands in his pockets, a quiet peace settling in his chest. The scars, his Rick's Duke's, were still there, but they no longer defined the story. That night, as the sky turned to gold, TJ looked toward the horizon and thought of his father. We're getting there, Dad, he whispered. One step at a time. And beside him, Duke wagged his tail as if agreeing. The apartment was small, but to TJ it felt like a cathedral of quiet. The walls were bare, freshly painted white, the air carrying the faint scent of new beginnings. A single window overlooked the desert horizon where the sun rose slowly each morning, flooding the room with gold. He and Duke stood in the doorway for a long moment, just taking it in. The echo of their footsteps filled the space. There was a mattress on the floor, a table by the wall, and a tiny kitchen that hummed with the sound of the refrigerator. For most people, it was nothing. For TJ, it was freedom. He set down his backpack and looked around, still half afraid the place might vanish if he blinked. Well, he said quietly, "Looks like we made it, boy." Duke sniffed the corners, exploring each inch of his new home. His paws left faint prints on the clean floor, his tail swaying with curiosity. When he reached the window, he paused, nose pressed against the glass eyes, scanning the bright sky outside. TJ joined him, leaning on the sill. The light poured across the room, spilling over a framed photograph resting on the ledge. It showed two men in uniform, Thomas Franklin and Daniel Morrison, standing shoulder to shoulder, grinning at the camera. Evelyn had given it to him on move-in day. TJ picked it up carefully, tracing a finger over the edges. "We made it, Dad," he whispered. "We kept the promise." The words hung in the air, gentle and sure. He placed the frame back on the windowsill where the morning light struck both faces just right, making them glow as if they were still watching over him. Duke padded back across the room and sank down beside the bed. The faint sounds of the city drifted through the window, distant traffic, the call of a passing train. But he didn't flinch. His breathing stayed even, calm. For the first time since Afghanistan, his body carried no tension. TJ sat on the floor next to him, resting a hand on the dog's back. The fur beneath his palm was warm and alive. "You did good, soldier," he murmured. Duke's eyes closed, a low sigh rumbling from deep within his chest. The sound wasn't fear anymore. It was peace. Afternoon turned to evening and the golden light faded to blue. TJ made a simple dinner and split it with Duke. Later, as the desert wind whispered through the open window, he stretched out on the mattress. Duke climbed up beside him, curling into a ball head, resting across TJ's legs. Outside, the city lights flickered in the distance like stars scattered across the ground. TJ stared up at the ceiling, the hum of life just beyond the walls. He thought about all the places he'd slept before, under bridges and shelters on cold ground, and how this simple room felt like the first place that belonged to both of them. He reached over, switching off the lamp. The darkness didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like rest. As he drifted towards sleep, he could hear Duke's steady breathing, the rhythm of a heart finally unburdened. The war that had followed them both across continents was growing quieter. Tomorrow would bring something new, something brighter. The morning light crept through the thin curtains, painting soft lines across the floor. The air was cool and quiet, broken only by the rustle of desert wind and the faint hum of distant traffic. TJ stirred on the mattress, blinking against the sunlight. Duke was already awake. He stood near the front door, his head tilted toward the crack of light spilling in beneath it. For a moment, he simply stood there, tail twitching, ears forward. The sunlight caught the edges of his coat, making it shimmer faintly gold. TJ pushed himself up, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, buddy," he said softly. Duke didn't turn. He kept his gaze fixed on the door, the same door that had once made him freeze. TJ watched in silence, realizing what was happening. The dog took one hesitant step forward, then another, his nose pressed gently against the doorframe. He sniffed the morning air, dry, warm, carrying the faint scent of mesquite and earth. Then, without waiting for permission, Duke nudged the door open with his paw. The hinges creaked. The world outside glowed with sunlight. For the first time in years, Duke walked out on his own. No leash, no coaxing, no fear. TJ smiled, the kind of smile that came from deep in the chest. "Go ahead, soldier," he murmured. "You've earned it." He followed Duke outside barefoot, the cool concrete still damp from the night. Duke stood in the brightness, eyes half closed against the glare, tail wagging slowly as he took it all in, the sky, the breeze, the sound of life beginning again. Across the street, laughter rang out. Lily and Connor were in the yard, a bright yellow ball bouncing between them. When they saw Duke, both waved excitedly. Lily called, "Come play, TJ laughed. "Go on," he said. Duke hesitated for only a heartbeat before bounding forward. The hesitation that once defined him was gone. He raced toward the children, his paws kicking up small clouds of dust. Lily threw the ball, and Duke chased it with a burst of joy that seemed to shake the morning itself. Connor cheered as Duke caught it mid-bounce tail, wagging furiously. The boy clapped his grin wide and unguarded. "He's fast," TJ joined them, hands on his hips, laughing as Duke circled back, dropping the ball at Lily's feet. The dog barked once, an eager, bright sound that made the children giggle. The sound of fear had become a sound of life. Grace stepped onto her porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the scene unfold. She caught TJ's eye across the street and smiled. "Looks like he's teaching us all something," she called. TJ nodded. "Yeah," he said softly, his eyes never leaving Duke. "He's teaching us how to start over." The sunlight grew warmer, wrapping around them all like an embrace. Duke darted across the grass, his movements smooth and confident. The shadows that once haunted his steps were gone. When the ball rolled too far, he didn't stop at the edge of the yard. He ran beyond it, chasing it fearlessly into the open space. TJ watched him go, his throat tightening with emotion. The same dog who had once trembled at the doorway was now running toward the horizon, unafraid of the world or what waited in it. The children's laughter echoed through the air, mingling with the sound of Duke's paws on the earth. And in that golden morning light, TJ felt it. The quiet certainty that their long battle, the one no one could see, was finally done. The war inside was finally over. Evening settled gently over Tucson, painting the sky in strokes of amber and violet. The air was still warm, humming with the quiet life of the desert. The low drone of cicadas, the whisper of wind through the mesquite trees, the slow rhythm of a world finally at rest. TJ sat at the small wooden table in his apartment, a single lamp casting soft light over a piece of paper. The pen trembled slightly in his hand as he began to write. To the Military Working Dog Program. This letter is to confirm the status of retired service dog K94427, also known as Duke. Duke has completed his duty. He is no longer a soldier. He's home. TJ paused, looking toward the open window. Duke was lying on the balcony, his fur glowing gold beneath the fading light. His ears twitched as the breeze carried the faint sounds of laughter from the street below, Lily, Connor, and other children playing with a ball. TJ smiled and continued writing. He spent his life serving others, and now he's teaching us what loyalty and forgiveness really mean. Thank you for trusting him with us. He's earned his peace. He signed his name and folded the letter carefully. For a long moment, he sat there in silence, the pen still warm in his hand. Then he looked up at the photograph on the shelf, the one of Thomas Franklin and Daniel Morrison side by side in dusty uniforms, both smiling at a camera that had frozen their youth forever. The photo caught the evening light just right, and for a heartbeat it almost seemed like they were alive again, laughing somewhere far beyond the reach of war. Across town, Evelyn Morrison sat in her living room, the same wooden box of letters open beside her. She ran a hand over the final page, the one with Daniel's promise written in faded ink. "If anything happens to Tommy, I'll bring Duke home." Tears glimmered in her eyes as she placed that letter beside TJ's new one. She added the photo of the two soldiers framed now with gentle care and set it by the window where the sunset poured through. "They kept the promise, Danny," she whispered. "Both of them." The light shifted, the gold deepening into red. Shadows stretched across the floor, long and soft. Evelyn leaned back, eyes closed, letting the warmth of peace settle into the quiet corners of her heart. Outside, TJ stood at the edge of the desert road with Duke beside him. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky into a sea of fire and rose. He reached down, resting a hand on Duke's head. The dog looked up at him, eyes calm, trusting, reflecting the glow of the setting sun. TJ smiled. "You're home, soldier," he said softly. "We both are." They began walking side by side down the dusty path that stretched toward the horizon. The air shimmered with gold, their shadows long and parallel against the sand. The city lights flickered to life behind them, but neither looked back. Because some stories don't end, they continue quietly in the hearts of those who still believe. And as the sun disappeared beyond the desert hills, a voice seemed to echo on the wind, tender and sure. Sometimes courage isn't about war. It's about daring to love again, even when the world has broken you. TJ kept walking. Duke followed close, tail wagging slowly. Two silhouettes moved together beneath the fading light, man and dog bound by a promise that never died. The story of TJ and Duke is more than a tale about survival. It is a reflection of the unspoken bond between humans and animals, especially the noble German Shepherd. These dogs embody loyalty, courage, and compassion in their purest forms. They do not judge, they do not demand. They simply give, even when the world has taken everything from them. Duke's journey from a war-torn field to a peaceful home reminds us that love can heal what pain once shattered, and that even the most wounded hearts can learn to trust again. In every wag of a tail, in every gentle gaze, there is a reminder that kindness is universal. When we choose to care for an animal, we are also choosing to awaken the best parts of ourselves: patience, empathy, and responsibility. A dog's loyalty asks for nothing more than our understanding, and in return, it teaches us what it means to be present, faithful, and brave in the face of fear. German Shepherds like Duke stand as symbols of unwavering devotion. They protect, serve, and love without condition, showing humanity what true strength looks like: quiet, constant, and selfless. Through them, we see that compassion has no boundaries and that redemption is always possible, no matter how deep the scars. As TJ and Duke walked into the sunset, they carried with them a message that reaches beyond their story. Healing begins when we open our hearts. Every act of kindness toward an animal ripples outward, changing lives in ways we may never see. Because sometimes the simplest truth is the most powerful. Love once given never dies. It only finds new paths to live on.